All right, there's some big updates when it comes to the Glass Fire, the Zogg Fire, the August Complex, North Complex, Creek Fire, and Bobcat Fire. So we got a lot to talk about. There's also some interesting things in the weather forecast we're going to go over to see what our wildfires could be doing over the next few days. So once again, it's going to be another long video, but thanks to some of your guys' great tips and advice, I now know how to separate the video into chapters. So if you don't have that much time or you're only interested in one of the wildfires, you should be able to go down into the time bar and just click directly to the wildfire you're interested in. With that being said, I'm going to start out this video by just doing a general overview of California wildfire conditions in general. So to understand all the individual fires, I'd suggest listening to the next few minutes here. So once again, starting out with the satellite imagery, you can see there's a large amount of smoke over Northern California and then working down into the valley due to the Creek Fire and the Castle Fire down here. You'll notice also that Southern California is actually looking pretty good, which is great news considering they had some tricky wildfire conditions yesterday. So what's going to be driving the weather throughout this entire week is this high pressure system that's going to be sitting over California really for the next 5 days. And that's doing a few things. With temperatures, it's leading to some record heat in some areas, which is obviously not what we want to see when there are already a number of wildfires burning. So looking at some of the high temperatures today, you can see we're going to be around that triple digit area. There are some regions that could be 10 to 15 degrees above average for this time of year. And unfortunately, this heat is sticking around throughout this week. Tuesday and Wednesday are going to be maybe 10 degrees above average for some places. And then the temperatures are actually going to be going up on Thursday. I would say overall, in the extended forecast, Thursday is the day I'm the most worried about right now, but we'll be talking about that throughout this video. I wanted to just show this because it's a good graphic for what our temperatures will be doing throughout some areas of California. Today, obviously very warm, but actually rising up and getting warmer on Thursday. Hopefully we do see some drop into the weekend, but that's a little bit farther out into the forecast than I typically trust. So the other big factor that this high pressure system is going to be bringing in is the humidity. Now, with all these fires, there's always three variables we talk about when it comes to weather. It's temperature, humidity, and winds. When it comes to our temperatures, warmer it is, worse it is for wildfire. When it comes to humidity, the drier it is, the worse it is for wildfire. That makes sense because dry air creates dry vegetation, and when vegetation is drier, it burns hotter, it's easier to burn, and overall it's just bad for fire growth. The last one we'll talk about is the winds that can lead to faster fire spread and what's called spotting, where it picks up burning embers, tosses them elsewhere, and creates new little fires. We'll get to winds in a second though. So with humidity, this, along with temperatures, are the two things that I'm the most worried about this week, as humidity is going to be staying in the teens, even throughout some of the nighttime hours for a number of our fires. And unfortunately, it's going to be like this all week long, especially in Southern California. When I get to the Bobcat forecast, the humidity map and graph is about as bad as I've ever seen. It's staying below 30% for the next 48 hours, which is just unheard of. The reason that's so bad to have this dry air even through the nighttime hours is it doesn't give firefighters a break where they can get a handle over the blaze. It just allows the fires to continue 24 hours a day. So as you can just see, going all the way into Friday, that dry air just stays over California all week long. The other thing that can lead to some rapid fire spread are the wind gusts. And this was the main problem over Sunday and Monday. We had those wind gusts actually into hurricane force numbers in a number of areas, especially up near the North Complex where we saw some rapid fire growth. They had some hurricane force winds, and I would say this is the good news in the forecast over the next 2 days. Those wind gusts have significantly calmed down from what they were the last 2 days. We still will have some wind gusts, probably 20 to 25 miles per hour in the afternoons, but it's nowhere near those 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts that we saw when a lot of these fires were blowing up on Sunday and Monday. One thing I will note though, winds still will be strong in Southern California. We're expected to get some Santa Anas into the 30 and 40s, so I will dive into that throughout this video. Overall with wind gusts though, much better than the last 2 days. So if you need some good news, you can find it there. When it comes to air quality, that is directly tied with the winds. But when it comes to upper level, it's actually bad when the winds decrease because that can lead to some worse air quality because you need the winds to spread out the smoke. So we're actually going to be seeing most likely some worse air quality over the next few days than we have been seeing in the past. You can see that right now we've got some unhealthy areas in Northern California, even into some very unhealthy areas around the Castle Fire and the Creek Fire. And then Southern California right now is looking moderate. The forecast for today, as those winds die off throughout the day today, we still do have some windier gusts this morning. So as those die off, majority of the North Bay into the Bay Area is going to be in that unhealthy range, and then including a couple spots in SoCal as well. Looking at the forecast for tomorrow, it appears things are going to be getting better, but I always take the extended air quality forecast with a grain of salt because it doesn't seem to account for new smoke being produced. What I was saying with the winds though, the main thing that leads to worse air quality are these upper level winds. And you can see this blue color here shows weak upper level winds, where this purple shows really strong winds. So when the winds over really the majority of northern and central California are weak, that allows the smoke from our fires just to settle down to the surface, and then we get that particulate matter right where we're breathing, which is extremely unhealthy. So looking into Tuesday and Wednesday, those weak winds are just going to be hanging out over California. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I've talked about this before, but while winds are obviously bad for air quality, it's more unhealthy for us. To be honest, I would rather have weak winds because that means our fires are going to be less extreme, and then the winds actually help our fires out a little bit. When you get a thick layer of smoke like this, it actually reduces the temperatures because that sunlight can't get through. And then with reduced temperatures, you actually see even weaker winds, so it's like a positive feedback loop. So overall, I would say the smoke right here, while it's bad for air quality, I'll take it because it's good for fire growth. Now, the first fire I want to talk about, let's dive into the fires, is the glass fire, because this is the number one wildfire I'm watching right now. You can see there's a large amount of smoke in the North Bay, but one thing you will notice, we don't see that huge smoke plume coming up like we saw yesterday. So that indicates at first glance that the fire behavior in this area has calmed down from what it looked like the last 2 days. We don't see that giant pyrocumulus cloud just exploding out of the area. Now, pyrocumulus, it sounds like a very scientific word. Just think of it as a fire thunderstorm. So when the fire is burning so hot, you get a ton of rising air that actually creates its own thunderstorm. So it's good to see that we don't actually see that. So diving into the map, the first thing I'd like to point out is that red flag warning is thankfully gone for the majority and actually all of Northern California. We do see a little spot in Southern California and possibly the Oregon border here. But yesterday, you'll remember, there was a red flag over basically all of Northern California, which is the last thing you want to see during wildfire season. So it is great to see that that red flag is gone. That basically means our winds are lighter and fire behavior isn't expected to be as extreme. So diving into the glass fire here, you can see there's a number of fire names. That's because this actually started out as 2 or 3 separate fires, but it's appeared to have combined into one large blaze now. So I'm just calling this the glass fire. Now, there's some good and bad news here. I would say what the good news is overall, this area that was working its way into Santa Rosa appears to have calmed down from yesterday. As always, this map shows the fire perimeter, and then these red dots indicate where there's active hotspots and active fire burning. And yesterday, we saw a ton of hotspots all over the southern edge, and it looks like for the most part it's calmed down in this area. We do still have that spot right there that appears to be actively burning, but that I would at least say is good news because that was starting to work its way into Santa Rosa, which I was certainly worried about. I still am worried about, but it's a good sign that it appears to have calmed down. The spots that I am worried about right now, one thing I will say about this map, this is based on satellite data, so don't think this is 100% confident, and it doesn't mean that every single spot within this perimeter has burned. Take, take this just as a general view for what might be going on. Don't take it as 100% true. So, looking at this though, I'm certainly concerned for the area around Calistoga. I've heard from a number of sources that this entire area has been evacuated. Obviously, don't take my word for it, check the CAL FIRE website, but I hear they have evacuated this area. As you can see, these little spot fires and hotspots starting to work their way in. And it's kind of coming from both sides, it appears, from the north and the south. So I know this is one of the top priorities, so they're actively trying to get some lines in, do some structured defense. This is a decent example of what a spot fire looks like, though. So you'd get the major blaze here, and then we were getting those northeast wind gusts, where it could pick up a burning ember, throw it elsewhere, and then start a new little fire. That's what a spot fire is. Now, the good news is those northeast winds have significantly calmed down. By significantly, I mean 40 miles per hour lower. So hopefully we'll see a lot less of these spot fires being spotted in the next couple of days. So one other area I want to point out is this northern edge. And this looks like the most active edge. You can see it if I zoom out here. You can see a lot of fire activity going on right there. It looks like there's a lot of fire growth. You can see the previous fire perimeter. So it gives you an idea for how much has burned recently, and it's still actively expanding. One thing I will say though is it's about to push into the LNU fire scar. So if the LNU fire already burned out a bunch of vegetation here, once the glass fire gets into here, it's going to significantly slow down the spread because there's going to be a lot less fuel to encourage more fire growth. One other area I want to point out is this area right here, because this is another spot I am pretty worried about right now. Again, this doesn't mean this area has these hotspots. It's just what a satellite is picking up, so it's the best information we can go with right now. And it appears that there are some hotspots working into, this is called St. Helena, and it is a little worrisome that the fire appears to be on both sides of here. So I know this is a top priority. They're getting more and more resources towards this fire every single day. So I know this is a spot where they're actively in structured defense right now. Overall, I would say the good news, if you need it, after kind of how bad this forecast looked right here, the good news is that the extreme winds that led to a lot of this extreme fire behavior, those winds are gone. We no longer have the red flag, so while the last 2 days have been very bad, the next 2 days should be better. So that's at least some good news there. When it comes to the glass fire, we are up to 36,000 acres, and unfortunately it's still at 0% containment. That's not too surprising. At the beginning of fires, they're typically focusing on protecting lives, getting people evacuated, starting to work on some structure defense. So you're unlikely to see containment at the beginning of a fire, as they're really just trying to save people's lives and properties. They don't have time to get lines in and really control the blaze yet. So when it comes to the evacuations, be sure to check the link in the description for all the most recent information. Unfortunately, this is showing that there have been 80 structures destroyed with this fire. I certainly hope this number does not go up anymore, but just based on some of those hotspots, it's going to be something I'll be watching over the next few days. This is at least some good news. That's about 500 more personnel than yesterday. I'm sure every single day they're taking some resources from some of our less active fires and deploying them to this fire. So I'm sure by tomorrow that's going to be even higher. We got 26 crews, 7 helicopters, 200 engines, 57 dozers, and 22 water tenders. Now, when it comes to the forecast for this area, with all our fires, there's some good and bad news. So I guess the good news is today and Wednesday aren't in the triple digits. I know that's not really saying much. It's still 94 and 96. That's above average, way hotter than we'd want to see, but it's not triple digits as we could be seeing on Thursday. Now, overall, I would say the things I'm most worried about, especially with our NorCal fires, it is the temperature and the humidity. You can see the humidity is getting down to 12% today, possibly into the single digits. That's not what you want to see. And tomorrow is looking extremely dry as well. So when it comes to temp and humidity, that's what I'm worried about. The good news is wind gusts appear to be calming down. Now, you can see that right now, 8-mile-per-hour wind gusts, that's exactly what we want to see. Hopefully firefighters are taking advantage of this right now and really getting a little more control over this blaze. You'll see as we push into the afternoon today, doesn't appear that we're getting into any 20-mile-per-hour wind gusts throughout the day today, so that's some great news. Something I will point out though, Wednesday could be coming up to 20 mile per hour, and then Thursday, we're actually expected to see some more gusts come in. I will say though, that's not that bad. That means we could be seeing some 30 to 35 mile per hour gusts in the gaps and canyons, but it's obviously not those 50 mile per hour gusts that we saw when this fire first started and was rapidly expanding. So overall, temperatures and dryness are what I'm worried about. Wind gusts appear to be better for the next 2 days, but I'm keeping my eye on Thursday and Friday as those wind gusts could start ticking back up again. So the next fire I want to talk about is the North Complex, and that's because this has been changing a lot over the last 5 days. About 5 days ago, this fire was looking great. We were up to containments of almost 80%. There wasn't really that many active areas, and unfortunately that has changed in the last couple of days with those extreme winds we saw over the weekend. You can see the smoke coming off of this fire, so there is some active fire growth going on when it comes to the North Complex. We can actually go check that out on this map. And one thing you'll note is that it's burning in a lot different areas than it was towards the end of last week. Towards the end of last week, we had a lot of growth on this northern edge here, this northeastern edge here, and this southern edge here. Now, something I'll point out is that all of those areas appear to be completely calm now. Where we do have a lot of growth is on this western edge right here. The main reason for this was due to those northeasterly winds. And honestly, the North Complex had the worst conditions over Sunday and Monday. That's where we had some hurricane force winds. That's where you get over 70 miles per hour. So that's what led to this northwestern edge starting to blow up again. But again, with all our fires, those gusts aren't going to be as extreme over the next couple of days. So hopefully we see this area start to calm down again. Now, I do know that this is an area that's going to be very important to keep our eye on as it's pushing in closer to some populated areas. I know that there's been a number of new evacuations put in place. I believe the entire town of Paradise is evacuated right now. So this is an area that I'm actively watching. Again, when it comes to those northeasterly wind gusts, though, that have led to a lot of the spread, those should be calming down. What will be happening in this area is something we've talked about before. It's called down canyon winds. So what happens is during the nighttime hours, at the lower elevations and in a canyon, it'll cool down. That will actually lead to some winds rushing down the canyon, which is why we see some active fire growth right now. We get those down canyon winds in the nighttime hours. Now what's good news is during the day the canyon heats up and then you get winds pushing back up the canyon. So then it'll be spreading the fire back to where it's already burned. And then it allows firefighters to come in here and put out some of these hot spots and hopefully get some lines in during the day. So that's the pattern I'm going to be expecting to see with this fire throughout this week, a return to that diurnal wind pattern where you get winds pushing down the canyon at night, leading to some fire growth, and then pushing back up the canyon, leading to some conditions where firefighters can hopefully get a handle over the blaze. So, looking at, no, sorry, I have about 40 tabs open here, so sometimes I lose track. Looking at the North Complex, it's at 308,000 acres. You'll notice that isn't up all that much from yesterday. That's about 2,000 acres up from yesterday. So it's not anywhere near those 100,000 acre days we've seen with some of our fires this season. Now, you will notice that containment number is down. It's down to 76%. We had previously seen it at 78%, but the reason for this is actually not what I expected at first. You'll notice that it appears the exact same areas are uncontained as have been in the past. We still have that northern section, the northeastern section, and that southern section that are still considered uncontained. Now, the reason the number went down isn't actually because any previous containment lines were jumped. By that, I mean these black lines indicate where containment is declared. So that decrease in containment wasn't due to the fire jumping any of the previous containment lines. It's actually due to this northern edge expanding. So with a larger perimeter, there's a larger portion of the fire that's uncontained. I was trying to practice how to say this morning, and I couldn't figure out a non-confusing way to say it, so hopefully that made sense. A larger portion of the uncontained fire is growing, so our containment number has gone down. Hopefully that made sense. Like I said, when it comes to evacuations, there have been a number of new evacuations. Never take my word for it when I say an area is safe. Be sure to check the link in the description. So, when it comes to the damages and losses, I will say these numbers haven't gone up all that much in the last few days, but it's good to go over just to get an idea of just how devastating this fire has been. We've had over 2,000 structures destroyed with the North Complex, 2 injuries, and 15 fatalities. To put that into context, the North Complex is the 5th deadliest wildfire in the history of California. So if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this wildfire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you. When it comes to personnel, we still have 1,400 personnel in this fire, 33 crews, 8 helicopters, 77 engines, 17 dozers, and 37 water tenders. So I would say when it comes to resources, that's some good news with this fire. We still have a ton of resources on it, and it appears there's only one area that's actively expanding. So hopefully they'll be able to just attack this area that's expanding with almost all of their resources. At least that's what we'd hope for. So again, containment, that's the main area we're looking at. Hopefully we get some new black lines in this area throughout the next couple days. When it comes to the forecast, this is one of the areas I'm most worried about when it comes to temperature and humidity. You can see temperatures staying high throughout this entire week, especially that rise on Thursday, and actually Wednesday is looking extremely hot for the North Complex as well, 98 and 97 for Oroville. This will be most likely what it'll look like throughout the region though. So temperatures are what I'm worried about. Also humidity. You can see it's getting into the low teens throughout the day today. So this afternoon, while the wind gusts aren't as bad as they've been, humidity is extremely low. So that's going to dry out a lot of our vegetation, and that's certainly something I'm worried about. Now, the other thing that I'm a little worried about with this one when it comes to humidity is these nighttime humidities. You don't see them going up to 60 or 80%. They're staying below 40. So what that does is it allows the fire to keep burning throughout the nighttime hours. And the reason that's bad comes back to what I was talking about earlier with those down canyon winds. That's when we're actually going to be seeing the worst winds for this fire, as the winds push down canyon and lead to some growth in this area. So if you have low humidity at the same time, those two things can couple to lead to some fire growth. So I would say nighttime hours are the key time I'm going to be watching this. I guess if you need some good news there, nighttime temperatures should be dropping into the 60s, so that's at least some good news. I always like looking at this map when it comes to wind gusts. You can see Tuesday will be around 20 mile per hour wind gusts, but certainly not the hurricane force winds we saw Sunday and Monday. Wednesday, it's still going to be gusty in this region. 25 miles per hour is never what you want to see. 27 on Thursday, possibly getting up to 30, 35. Certainly not what we want to see, so I am going to be watching the wind gusts when it comes to the North Complex. Again, the key spot to watch though is this northwestern section, and again, keep updated with all recent evacuations. So the next fires I want to talk about are the August Complex and the Zogg Fire. And I'm going to do the forecast for these fires kind of together because they're actually predicting that the two fires might combine throughout this week. One thing I will point out on the satellite imagery, I know it's hard to really see anything because there's so much smoke, but you will notice this large smoke plume blowing up about right now. This is basically real-time satellite data, so you see a large smoke plume blowing up right now. That's not what we want to see, and it appears to be around the August complex area. One other thing I will point out when it comes to this smoke over the area, this isn't what we want to see because they're likely not going to be able to do any aerial operations today. That's where they get helicopters and planes in to drop retardant and water to create some good lines, put out the fire. I'd imagine we're not going to get any aerial operations in today as this smoke is looking thick. The good news though, the flip side, the double-edged sword that I've been talking about, when you have this much smoke, not that much sunlight can penetrate in, so temperatures and winds should be lower than they're showing in the forecast. So the first one I'll talk about is the Zogg Fire. This had a lot of growth yesterday. It is up to 40,000 acres and it's at 0% containment. Now, if we actually take a look at this, that containment number makes sense. As you can see, it's just actively growing all over the fire perimeter, especially in this northwestern section where we see a lot of hotspots outside of the previous fire perimeter. Also true on the southern edge here, and that southern edge is what they're predicting could combine with the August complex throughout this week. I'm certainly going to be watching that, and it'll be interesting to see if they just combine Zogg into the August complex like we've seen happen with some individual fires in the past. So when it comes to that containment still being at 0%, that's mostly due to what happens when these fires first start. When these fires first start, the main priority, as I was saying earlier with the glass fire, the main priority is just getting people out, life safety, starting to work on some structure defense. They haven't had time to really get any good lines in yet. Again, big priority at first is life safety, so it's no surprise that containment is still at 0% with this one. So when it comes to the Zogg Fire, there is some unfortunate news. There are already 3 fatalities associated with this fire and 146 structures destroyed. So as always, if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by this fire, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and hopefully this is as bad as we see it and these numbers don't continue to go up. Now, when it comes to personnel, we have 700 personnel on this fire. Not as much as we've seen with a lot of our other fires, but resources are spread thin now throughout all of California. We have over 25 major blazes going on right now, so really resources are stretched thin for everyone. We do have 8 helicopters, 81 engines, 36 dozers, and 19 water tenders. I'll be interested to find out if any of these helicopters are going to be in use today, as the smoke in this area does look extremely thick. Now, I'll also point out again that August fire looks like there's some active fire behavior going on with it. So let's take a look and see if we can identify where that active fire behavior might be happening. It looks pretty similar to yesterday. This whole northern edge and it's kind of northwestern edge are actively burning. We see a lot of hot spots outside of the previous fire perimeter. The main reason for that, I would say, has been due to those strong northeasterly wind gusts. Because you think about it, if you get northeasterly gusts coming down like this, that's going to lead to fire growth on the southwestern portion of where the fire might have previously been burning. So the good news with this one is those wind gusts are significantly calming down. So hopefully a lot of this growth starts to calm down as well. If you need some good news, let's check out the southern portion. This was one of the major priority spots last week, and you can see there's basically no hot spots left in this area. I even heard from a couple of sources that they're basically just patrolling the perimeter here, starting to mop up some of the last hot spots. So that's good news on the southern edge, as well as the eastern edge. The eastern edge is at about 100% containment. I guess one other thing of good news for the Zogg fire in the August complex is if the Zogg fire pushes in to this area that's already burned, then there's going to be no more fuel, or at least reduced fuel, to lead to further growth. So if that fire pushes in here, it should slow down how much the Zogg fire is growing, at least in this area. If we check out the containment map for the August complex, it's pretty much what you'd expect. Along the eastern edge, we have 100% containment, and then where we still have fire growth in this northern and northwestern area, that's where containment is still not happening. On the southern edge, I'm expecting to get some full containment over the next couple days, as the fire looks to have significantly calmed down in that area. Now, when it comes to the forecast, we're looking pretty good when it comes to wind gusts. While we obviously don't want to see 20 to 25 mile per hour gusts, it's a lot better than that 40 to 45 miles per hour that led to a lot of this active growth in these northern and northwestern sections. So coming back here, we can see what's going to be happening. We're getting low winds in the overnight hours, so that's great news. Hopefully firefighters will be able to take advantage of some of those cooler nighttime conditions, reduced winds, to put out some hot spots and get some good new lines in. You can see still some 25 mile per hour wind gusts during the afternoon hours and working into Thursday as well. The reason these wind gusts on Thursday are important are when you combine them with temperatures. While that shows 89 degrees, you can see Covello could be in the triple digits. So Thursday is the main day I'm going to be watching for this one, as we get extremely warm temperatures, possibly record-breaking, mixed with some 25 mile per hour wind gusts. Wind gusts right there. So Thursday, I'd say, is the main day I'm watching. Hopefully, though, firefighters will be able to take advantage of some of those nighttime conditions to get a handle over this blaze. So the next fire I want to talk about is the Creek Fire and the Castle Fire here. You can see there's a large amount of smoke being produced by these, but one thing to think about is the winds in this area are extremely weak, so any smoke that's produced is going to just sit over these fires and make it look worse than it is. In actuality, we're not seeing that much growth with these ones, but there are some areas that are actively burning, so let's scroll down to take a look at that. One thing I will say, it is great to see that red flag warning out of this area. Hopefully that stays true throughout this entire week, as wind gusts shouldn't be as bad as we've seen. I'll actually talk about the Castle Fire first, because there's some good news with this. The southern portion of this fire was one of the spots where it was a very high priority last week, and you can see the southern portion is basically out. You might see one hot spot there, but a lot less fire behavior than we saw last week. Where there is still some growth is on this northern edge. It's burning into some heavy fuels, some tricky steep terrain, so that's what's leading to some of this growth here, although it certainly doesn't look as bad as it has in the past. So if we go in and look at what's happening, you might be confused. Sometimes I call this the Castle Fire, sometimes I call it the Sequoia Complex. Just think of those two things as the same thing. Acreage hasn't gone up all that much. It's at 150,000 acres, and containment is at 58%. So overall, I'm feeling pretty good about this fire. Now, the one that Also has some good news, I would say, is the creek fire here. One of the key priorities last week was this western edge. They actually got some military personnel to help out, and they got some great lines in. You can see the fire in this area is much reduced from what it was last week, so that's great to see. We also see almost no fire behavior on the southern edge here, which is also great to see because this actually had some active growth last week. So it's good to see the hotspots are out in that area. Where we do still see some growth is on this northern edge and this northeastern edge here. Now, the reason for that, it's still burning in some pretty dry, heavy fuels. Some of the fuels in this area are critically dry. There's a lot of pine trees that have a high mortality rate due to the bark beetles and the drought that happened a few years ago. So that's what's leading to some growth in this area, along with the steep terrain. But the good news when it comes to this is we're actually seeing slower growth, and there's two reasons for that. The first reason is as it burns farther north and northeast, it's working into rockier terrain. So where there's more rocks, there's less vegetation, which means less fuel for the fire. There's also less fuel for the fire because it's burning into an area that has previously burned in the past. It was called the Lion Fire, which has previously burned out some of this vegetation. So overall, we're seeing some slower growth with this one. And you can actually see this on the Wharf S fire model. You'll notice this fire combines the fire below with the atmosphere above. It's why it's one of the best wildfire models in the world. And one thing you'll notice is the growth of this fire looks a lot slower than it did last week. There were some periods last week where this model showed the entire southern edge just blowing up with some of these gustier winds, the western edge expanding out to here. So it's good to see that there's not that much growth expected over the next day or two associated with this fire. What you will notice though is where you do see some stronger winds pushing away from the fire, that is where you see some kind of stronger fire growth because you get these winds pushing the fire out, as you can actually see perfectly right there. One reason for that could be due to spot fires. It can pick up some burning embers, throw them out here, and then lead to some fire growth. Now, what I will say with this, it's an experimental forecast. It doesn't take into account fire suppression tactics. So don't take this as 100% what's going to happen. It's just a good visualization of how winds and fire interact. So just to take a look at what this model is expecting to burn over the next 2 days, this is what the fire perimeter looks like right now. And in 2 days, they're expecting some growth on this western area here and this area on the eastern section. Now, that's interesting because that's exactly where it was expecting some of the strongest winds. So, like I said, we probably won't see all of this burn, but it's a good visualization of how winds and fire interact. So when it comes to the creek fire, we are up to 305,000 acres. Something you'll notice, that's not that much growth from yesterday. That's only up 1,000 acres from yesterday, which is exactly what we want to see. When this fire was first taken off, it was burning 80 to 100,000 acres a day. So to see only 1,000 acres burned throughout 24 hours, it's exactly what we want to see. And I'm predicting that's going to hold true through really the rest of this fire. I mean, we don't have that much active fire growth on this western and southern edge. And then on this northern edge, the growth is slowing. So I'm not expecting any rapid increase in the acreage burned over this week, at least hopefully. It will be interesting to see what happens with those temperatures and that dry air, but I'll get to the forecast in a second here. As always, when it comes to evacuations, the link is in the description. And when it comes to damages and losses, this hasn't gone up since, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday last week. I know they did get some new aircraft in to resurvey some of the areas that they thought had burned, and this number didn't go up. So that's great news there. They got new data in, and no new structures destroyed. So it's good to see that number staying at 855, even though that's obviously not what we want to see with this fire overall. When it comes to personnel, that's another reason I'm feeling pretty confident about the North Complex. we've got 3,000 personnel on this. I believe that's the most on any of our fires that we've talked about. 69 crews, 12 helicopters, 287 engines, 35 dozers, and 85 water tenders. So when it comes to the forecast, this one's interesting because you can see temperatures are expected to be a whole 10 degrees lower than our other fires, which is good news, I would say. And you'd see it's basically hovering around 90 throughout this entire week. We're not seeing that huge increase in temperatures on Thursday that we're seeing with a lot of our other fires. Now, one thing I am worried about with this one is the humidity. Like I showed earlier, we have dry air just sitting over California throughout this entire week, and you'll notice the humidity doesn't go up at night. So what that does is allow that fire behavior to continue 24 hours a day, which is not what we want to see, but overall, temperatures are lower than our other fires, winds should be lower than our other fires, so I'm feeling pretty good about the North Complex in general. Now, the next fire I want to talk about is the Bobcat Fire. And something you'll notice from the satellite imagery here, you can't even see where the Bobcat Fire might be because it doesn't look like it's producing any smoke whatsoever. And it always takes me a while to scroll down to this because it's all the way down in Southern California. One thing that probably stands out to you right away, there is a red flag warning just south of the Bobcat Fire. And this is something that I am worried about just in the LA area in general. There are some tricky conditions continuing throughout this week. It's going to be extremely hot, it's going to be extremely dry, and we're actually seeing those extreme wind gusts continue, so we're not getting the break from the winds like we are in the north. You know, I shouldn't exactly say break from the winds in the north. It's still going to be 25 mile per hour gusts in some area. Not what you want to see, but at least better than it was this weekend. So back to the Bobcat Fire. I would say the reason you're not seeing any smoke on the satellite imagery is because we're not really seeing any hotspots on this map. We do have a couple remaining around the Mount Wilson area, but I heard from one source they're just mopping up around Mount Wilson. Whenever you hear the term mop up, that indicates that the active fire behavior and the real extreme conditions appear to be gone out of the area, so that's some great news there. And you'll notice with the rest of this fire, you can't really find any other hotspots. So I would say I'm feeling great about the Bobcat Fire, even though the LA area in general is the forecast I'm quite possibly the most worried about. So when it comes to the Bobcat Fire, you can see it's the exact same as yesterday. 114,000 acres. Great to see that hasn't gone up. 62% containment. I expect this to go way up over the next few days as they just secure the lines around this fire. 1,300 personnel. I know resources have been a problem for this fire, but there's only one area, at least it appears there's only one area still burning, so they'll just be able to attack that area with the resources they have. Looking at the containment map, you can see the entire northern and southern portions are considered 100% contained, as well as a large portion of this eastern edge here. One thing I'll point out that actually confused me when I was first looking at this map, you're tempted to think this orange line represents some active fire growth, but it actually represents road closures. So I thought I'd point that out because it is a little bit confusing. One thing I will point out is this northeastern area. This was an area that we saw a lot of growth with towards the end of last week, but as I pointed out, we don't see that much growth in this area anymore. So I'm expecting they'll get some containment over this in the next couple days. And then as those final hotspots are put out around Mount Wilson, we'll hopefully get some containment here and really wrap this fire up. Now, while I'm expecting the Bobcat Fire to pretty much be wrapped up throughout this week, the conditions in the LA area remain pretty tricky. Now, you'll notice it shows temperatures in the 80s, so that sounds pretty good, especially compared with some of the triple digits we see up in Northern California. But I'll point out this is for Mount Wilson. So this is a higher elevation place where the temperatures are expected to be lower. In some of the foothill areas, we're going to see some triple digits and possibly some record heat. So don't get too excited about the 80-degree temperatures yet. The reason I wanted to show this high elevation place, one, it's the only area that actually looks like it's still burning, and two, this humidity graph is about as bad as it possibly could be. You see temperatures or humidities possibly into the single digits, low teens throughout all day today and all day tomorrow. And then in the nighttime hours, it's staying below 30%. That's almost unheard of to stay below 30% for 48 hours. That's not what you want to see. And the reason that's important, a lot of the a lot of the fuels in this area are critically dry. They haven't burned in 60 years. So when you get these extremely low humidities 48 hours in a row, that will just dry out the fuels, especially the finer fuels, even more than they already are, and that could lead to some new fires starting. I say new fires starting because I'm actually not too worried about the Bobcat Fire expanding any further, but I am worried about all that dry vegetation. If you get a new fire start, it's a good chance it's going to rapidly spread. One other thing I'll point out here, there are some wind gusts right now. It's about 9 a.m. and you can see there are some wind gusts right now, but those appear to be dying out throughout the next 2 days, but I'd take that with a grain of salt as we should see some pretty gusty winds. Yeah, if you got excited with that last wind graph, this probably just kind of spoiled that good feeling you just had. Gusts up to 35 to 40 miles per hour across LA and Ventura areas, and they're Santa Ana winds. If you live in Southern California, you know Santa Ana is never what you want to hear when it's wildfire season. Good for surfers, bad for wildfire because it just has a way of blowing in the warm, dry conditions from further inland. So, with humidity, single digits into the teens, and heat advisory, possibly triple digits. So, that's why the LA area is actually the portion of California I'm the most worried about right now. And you can see it well on this map. Shows pretty weak wind gusts right now, but we do start to see some larger wind gusts pushing in the afternoon hours, especially with those Santa Ana offshore winds. I'll also point out there appear to be some offshore winds in the higher elevation places of Santa Barbara. Those are called sundowners. That was actually going to be my master's thesis till it got canceled due to COVID. So, interesting to see those sundowners. That can lead to some rapid fire spread in the Santa Barbara area as well. So, I'll keep my eye out on the Santa Barbara area. Now, I also want to look at the temperatures here. You can see that triple digits, possibly some record-breaking temps. I'd imagine it's going to be even worse. Oh, it looks like it's not going to be as bad on Thursday. No. Once you get into 5 p.m., back up into those triple digits. Temperatures throughout this entire week going to be bad for Southern California, LA area. Same with humidity. We're going to be in the low teens to possibly single digits. And then when it comes to those wind gusts, we could see some 35 to 40 mile per hour gusts. So while I'm not too worried about the Bobcat Fire anymore, I am worried about new fires starting. So taking a broad overview of how the 2020 California wildfire season has been in general, you can see of the top 6 largest California wildfires of all time, 5 have happened this season and 3 are still actively growing. SCU and LNU are basically wrapped up, almost 100% containment there, but August, North, and Creek are still growing, so I'm going to continue to make these updates every single day. Also, when it comes to the wildfire season in general, to put it into context, we are up to over 3 million acres. That's the worst wildfire season in recorded history, and you'll also notice the August complex is almost reaching 1 million acres. There are some seasons, actually, I think majority of seasons, we don't see 1 million acres burned throughout the entire season, let alone with one fire. So hopefully we don't get to 1 million with the August, but it's not looking too good with how hot and how dry it's going to be throughout this week. Looking into the extended wildfire season forecast, it's been extremely hot and extremely dry for basically the entire last month, and October is actually when we historically see a lot of our worst fires. So all that dry vegetation that's just been getting drier over the last month is gonna most likely lead to some active fire behavior in October. I hate to say it, but that's honestly how I see it right now, so I will continue to do these updates throughout this entire season. Hopefully the rains come soon. As always, if you're a member of CAL FIRE or the U.S. Forest Service, thank you for all the amazing work you do. Thank you to San Jose State and Dr. Craig Clements for basically teaching everything I know about wildfire. And as always, if you or any of your friends or family have been affected by these wildfires, my thoughts and prayers go out to you, and thanks for watching.